Okay, welcome everyone. Y saludos. Thank you for joining us today for Wellness Wednesdays, our 5th Community Engagement and Research webinar being hosted by the Juan Antonio Corregel Puerto Rican Cultural Center of Chicago. Developed resources reported in this webinar are supported by the network of the National Library of Medicine, the National Institutes of Medicine or of Health, or NIH, under cooperative agreement. The content is the sole responsibility of the authors and does not necessarily represent the official views of the NIH. The sessions throughout the series will provide health education information and resources. Today, we will discuss honoring Helen Rodriguez Trías and the contributions of Latinas in research, with our featured guest for today's webinar, Dr. Ruth E. Zambrana from the University of Maryland. First, we are joined by our program sponsor, Darlene Kiaski from the University of Iowa, who will share resources offered through the network of the National Library of Medicine. We will also hear from the COO of the Puerto Rican Cultural Center, Juan Manuel Calderon, who will share information about how the Puerto Rican Cultural Center is rooted in honoring the tireless advocacy efforts of Dr. Helen Rodriguez Trías and her legacy in promoting women's rights and health. Bienvenidos, mi gente. My name is Lisa Ponte Soto. I'm the founding president and CEO of Tanoma Consulting, the moderator of this webinar series. I'm a health inequities researcher and evaluator trained in public health, community, participatory, culturally, and linguistic appropriate practices. Tanoma Consulting is a national nonprofit consulting firm that provides transformative, culturally responsive research, evaluation, and training services to advance health, education, and workforce equity. And to learn more about us, you can visit us at www.tanomaconsulting.com. I want to quickly introduce our team. Ms. Xiomara Rodriguez, Director of Digital Presence Initiative at the Puerto Rican Cultural Center. Ms. Melissa Banerjee, Director of Development at the PRCC. Ms. Zenaida Lopez, Associate Director of El Rescate Transitional Living Program at PRCC. Ms. Emily Medina Rodriguez, Research Associate with the PRCC and Tanoma Consulting, and Kimberly Silva, Research Associate with Tanoma Consulting. We also want to introduce our liaisons, the esteemed Dr. Aida Diachello, Professor at Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Preventative Medicine. Ms. Susana Gonzalez, Nurse Consultant and Educator with ASI Home Care and the National Association for Hispanic Nurses, Illinois Chapter. Ms. Monica Rodriguez, Director of Communications and Engagement at the Northwestern University's All of Us program. We also would like to acknowledge our partners for this webinar series, the Illinois Precision Medicine Consortium for the All of Us project, comprised of 6 Chicago-based medical centers, the Puerto Rican Agenda of Chicago, a national nonprofit organization comprised of local Puerto Rican leaders ensuring the self-determination of Puerto Ricans in Chicago, throughout the diaspora, and in Puerto Rico through policy and advocacy. El Rescate Transitional Living Program, a program of the Puerto Rican Cultural Center, which provides culturally appropriate, identity-affirming housing for homeless LGBTQ and or HIV-positive youth ages 18 to 24 through a continuum of solutions. Vida Sida, a program of the Puerto Rican Cultural Center that provides youth access to HIV prevention services, as well as employment, educational resources, and living skills training. Vida Sida is located in the area that has witnessed the highest rates of HIV among Latinos. The Illinois chapter of the National Hispanic Nurses Association, a professional, voluntary, and nonprofit healthcare organization dedicated to enriching the lives of Hispanic nurse individuals through the promotion of academic attainment, mentorship, professional development, and actively reshaping healthcare in the Hispanic community. And Illinois Unidos, a consortium of Latino clinicians, elected officials, and public health practitioners, educators, and community organizers addressing inequities due to the impact of COVID-19 in the Latino communities and beyond. Before we begin, we want to get to know where you're from. So please enter your name in the chat. Let us know what organization you represent and what city or neighborhood you're from. Okay, well, welcome again as we continue our programming. For today, please note that we're going to leave a few minutes at the end of the session for Q&A, so make sure to enter your comments or questions in the chat box. And also, if you're following the conversation on Twitter, please use the hashtags AllOfUsResearch, PRCC-Chicago, Women's Health, Race Matters, Health Equity. Or tag us at JACPRCC, All of Us Research, Tanoma LLC, NNLM GMR, NNLM AOU, or Juan M. Calde. Now we are excited to introduce you, Ms. Darlene Caskey, who will share a few words from the National Network of the Library of Medicine.
Thank you, Lisa. On behalf of the Network of the National Library of Medicine, I am honored to partner with the Puerto Rican Cultural Center to bring trusted, meaningful health information to you. The National Library of Medicine is one of the 27 National Institutes of Health located on the NIH campus in Bethesda, Maryland. It is the world's largest biomedical library, offering a vast print collection as well as electronic resources to researchers, health professionals, and the general public. The network of the National Library of Medicine consists of 8 regional academic health libraries and over 9,000 partners nationwide to support the National Library of Medicine's mission to access and share health information and to raise awareness of the NIH All of Us research program to advance medicine, treatment, and care. And by funding partners like the Puerto Rican Cultural Center, together, we can support the health information needs that are relevant to your community. So, thank you for attending today's webinar. And if you would like to learn more about NNLM All of Us and the ways you or your organization can participate, learn, and work with us, please visit our website at nnlm.gov/allofus. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Darlene. And we want to remind everyone that we value your feedback. We value your time here, and we really want to hear from you. If you have suggestions or comments regarding this session or future sessions that you would be interested in, please do use the following link, and please use that link to complete the survey after today's session. I am now delighted to introduce to you the COO of the Juan Antonio Corregel Puerto Rican Cultural Center, Mr. Juan Manuel Calderon. Mr. Calderon is driven to confront injustices that people of color face daily, particularly the Latino LGBTQ community. He has leveraged community and government support to address great disparities in education and access to resources. Formerly, he assumed leadership of Vida Sida. Currently, he oversees several programs that can be standalone agencies. These include education, housing, public health, early childhood education, and unemployment, urban agriculture, violence prevention, and arts and cultural initiatives. He is a recognized activist and a celebrated community leader who advises local, state, and federal legislators. He is passionately active in policy efforts in the Chicago City Council and the Illinois General Assembly. He has many, many recent accomplishments, including the establishment of a transnational partnership with Cuba's National Center of Sex Education and Trans-Cuba, as well as partnerships with LGBTQ organizations in Colombia. He has served on numerous boards, as member, as commissioner, holding various titles, including treasurer, that you can read further about on your screen. His efforts had been recognized by La Voz del Paseo Boricua's Top 10 Under 30, Windy City's Times 30 Under 30, DIFFA Chicago, IVI, IPO Gay and Lesbian Caucus, Glenn Sudbury and Leadership Award from the National Center of Sex Education, Havana, Cuba. Mr. Calderon has a bachelor's degree from Northeastern Illinois University and is currently pursuing a master's in public health at the University of Illinois at Chicago. So without further ado, we invite Mr. Juan Manuel Calderon to provide us some remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Alisa Ponte, and I want to welcome everyone to the Puerto Rican Cultural Center. The Puerto Rican Cultural Center is named, in fact, after Juan Antonio Corregel. But there's a refrán in Puerto Rico that is very commonly used, or at least it is used with my grandmother. No hay Juan Antonio Corregel sin Consuelo Lee Corregel. And Consuelo Lee Corregel was a nationalist, a Puerto Rican nationalist, and we've named our child care center after. Consuelo Lee Correger used to advocate, and we follow a mission because she was one of these strong Puerto Rican women, and she used and her motto. She followed a model. She didn't like the American model of live and let live, because in her interpretation was, when you live and let live instead of live and help to live, which was the model that she used, then you're not really helping or contributing to the growth and the development of a people. So I think that that is important as part of our discussion, or as part of the discussions that we're having about Latinas in research, because we do have the Helen Rodriguez Trías and the Virginia Bishop Public Health Initiatives at the Puerto Rican Cultural Center. And we have very strong women in research and in public health that have led the way to enhance and expand the level of care for Puerto Ricans and Latinos in Chicago and across the Midwest, but also in Puerto Rico. For us and for me, I think I want to be able to highlight that there has been many challenges that we have to overcome as a Puerto Rican people in terms of trust and in terms of engagement when we speak about what La Operación means for Puerto Rican women and what it means to access care as Puerto Ricans were also used as guinea pigs following the, I think in the previous series we discussed the African American conversations and the conversatorios about women and their experiences as an African American woman, and I hope that you are able to get a fruitful discussion as we discuss the importance of Latinas in research, and we look at ways of how do we expand, and how do we expand by providing equity to more Latinas and more Puerto Rican women specifically in research. So thank you very much for the national, our partners for being a great partner, and I'll leave you with that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Juan. And so you're hearing the name of Dr. Helen Rodriguez Trías, and as sort of who we're headlining and honoring today. The Puerto Rican Cultural Center has equally been invested in honoring her contributions through their public health initiatives. Doctor, did you want to add something, Juan?
Yes, and my apologies, Dr. Lisa Aponte. Dr. Helen Rodriguez Trías is a concept, and I think it's important to share because she was a scholar at the national level. She was a scholar that represented the Puerto Rican diaspora across the country. And I think that for us, one of the things that, and I would share that Dr. Aida Giacello as our senior advisor and much of the leadership is how do we create a people's clinic that will be named after Dr. Helen Rodriguez Trías as part of our public health initiatives. So we're working within concepts of how do we continue to expand access to research, because we do know as we try to be a very data-driven organization that we need to improve. We need to improve in terms of access for Puerto Rican women in research and specifically in public health. And I apologize that I dismissed that Dr. Helen, for us, Dr. Helen Rodriguez Trías plays a critical role in this country in her advocacy for Puerto Rico and for Puerto Rican women and for research. Thank you.
Thank you. Amen. Right, very timely. As I continue to share a little bit more about Dr. Helen Rodriguez Trías, she is, for those of you who may not know, a New York-born Puerto Rican physician who had, like many Puerto Ricans, a transnational experience. She, at an early age, went to Puerto Rico, resided there until about when she was 10 years old, and then returned to the New York area. And then subsequently returned and studied at the University of Puerto Rico and completed her doctoral or her medical degree there. She was a woman who was committed to ending the sterilization abuse, particularly among poor women, women of color, and women with different abilities, physical abilities, who are historically or have been historically more likely to be sterilized in comparison to middle-class white women. In Puerto Rico, 1/3 of women of childbearing age, as young as 14 years old, and up to around 45 years of age, were sterilized without their full consent between 1938 and 1968. So yes, for decades. It is a horrible, egregious injustice that she played a critical role in concert with community members to address. Among her many accomplishments in the areas of women's reproductive rights, she is the founding member of the Committee to End Sterilization Abuse and the Committee for Abortion Rights and Against Sterilization Abuse. She was instrumental in the establishment of federal guidelines that required women's written consent to sterilization, providing and understanding or providing understandable language, right? Layman's language, simple language that the average person who does not have that clinical background or that scientific background could understand, which was also a big disadvantage for the women who were sterilized. Not just that they not have consent, but they had very limited understanding of what was happening to them, which really compounded to that injustice. And in addition to that, there were provisions that required that there be a waiting period between the time that the woman provided consent and the time that the sterilization procedure was conducted. So her work, among her many accomplishments, is honored in numerous ways, including the Presidential Citizens Medal for her work on behalf of women, children, people with HIV/AIDS, and the poor. And also, the American Public Health Association Latino Caucus hosts an annual Helen Rodriguez-Trías breakfast where they honor a scholar and recognize a scholar in her name. Among many of those scholars involved in those efforts and recognized is Dr. Ruth Enid Zambrana, who is our featured guest, and I'm now going to introduce her. And you can learn more about Dr. Helen Rodriguez-Trías and the sterilization of Puerto Rican women through a video on YouTube called La Operación, or The Operation. So now it is my esteemed pleasure to introduce our featured guest speaker, Dr. Ruth Zambrana. Dr. Zambrana is a distinguished university professor in the Harriet Tubman Department of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies. She is also the director of the Consortium on Race, Gender, and Ethnicity, and an adjunct professor of family medicine at the University of Maryland, Baltimore School of Medicine. Dr. Zambrana's scholarship applies a critical intersectional lens to structural inequality in racial, Hispanic ethnicity, and gender inequities in population health and higher education trajectories. She has published widely on health inequity in her major research concentrations: women's health, maternal and child health, socioeconomic health disparities, and life course impacts on health and mental well-being of traditionally and historically underrepresented minorities. Dr. Zambrana collaborated with the Pan American Health Organization to launch educational training and intervention programs internationally in Mexico and Central America to address gender equity and health. She has published 12 books and significant articles, book chapters, reports, and reviews. She serves on several editorial boards and is frequently invited as an expert scholar to serve on professional and government committees. Her latest book is Toxic Ivory Tower: The Consequences of Work Stress and the Health of Underrepresented Minority Faculty. Dr. Zambrana is the recipient of numerous awards, including the 2011 Julian Zamora Distinguished Career Award by the American Sociological Association, Sociology of Latinos, Latinas section for her contributions to the sociology of Latinos and immigrant studies, teaching and mentoring, and the 2013 American Public Health Association Latino Caucus Founding Member Award for Vision and Leadership. And so, without further ado, I would love to hand our time over to our featured guest, Dr. Zambrana.
First of all, buenas tardes, good afternoon. Esteemed colleagues, friends, and members of our community. I want to thank Dr. Lisa Aponte and Giacello for inviting me to celebrate Dr. Helen Rodriguez Trías, and to share with you the achievements of other Puerto Rican women in the 20th century. I want to start by my remarks by sharing my journey about this presentation and what has happened. About 2 or 3 months ago, Dr. Ponte asked me to honor Puerto Rican women and Latina women in the spirit of the work that Dr. Rodriguez Trías has done. I started to do a search on the internet and was unable to locate any Puerto Rican scholars that were considered great achievers. Dr. Helen Rodriguez Trías appeared in 2 or 3 of Great Women Achievers. So I asked a research assistant to help me, assuming that I was not doing the search correctly. A few weeks later, the research assistant came back to me and informed me that she could not find any great achievers. I then took a deep dive into the internet that holds everything, it seems sometimes, and still came up short. I then created my own list of Puerto Rican and Mexican American greats. So today I present to you a select few of individuals who fulfill the criteria and many of the awards and many of the characteristics that Dr. Helen Rodriguez Trías represented. Humanitarian, activist, pioneer, advocate, change agent. The lack of data itself, as I always say, the lack of data is data. The lack of data reveals what is considered important and what is not considered so important. So the lack of data inspired a deep and hard search to explore what are the mechanisms in this society for recognition? What are the criteria to be considered a great? How do we fit that criteria? It was also really surprising recently to see a word that has been taboo for so long outside of our Puerto Rican community, outside the African American community. The word is activist. And Dr. Rodriguez and so many others have been activists, discoverers, innovators, and yet have not been recognized. And I thought about the activists in Vieques. I thought that were concerned about environmental pollution. And I wondered, did any of them get awards? I thought of the American Indians and Native Americans and their struggles for environmental justice. Did any of them get awards? And of course, the African American environmental justice movement in inner city poor neighborhoods. The work of no data is very unsettling. So my presentation will take us briefly through the following set of questions because it is only a beginning. And the questions are, what do we know about Puerto Rican women and achievement? And who has acknowledged their achievement? Why is this important? What are our barriers to achievement? And what needs to be done to claim those achievements? So first I want to acknowledge the 2 research assistants, Elizabeth Early in particular, who dedicated herself and was so angry that she could not find anyone. She identified some of the hidden Puerto Ricans and Latino women across disciplines, and Courtney Butler, who also worked very hard on editing and putting colors that represent us. I also want to thank my colleagues, Dr. Maxine Bacazin and Robert Valdez, for their interest and suggestions of uncelebrated pioneers and innovators who are Puerto Rican, although they are both Mexican American. The first thing I was looking for to start this presentation was Puerto Rican poetess Julia Burgos, 1914 to 1953. Puerto Rican women are strong women. They were feminists way before the nation, the United States, discovered feminism. Julia Burgos was a feminist, an author, a poet, and a civil rights activist for women and African and Afro-Caribbean writers. She was a woman before her time. This is one of the quotes that I really think represents Puerto Rican women, who we are, and what we hold to the world. Don't let the hand you hold you down. I am life, I am strength, I am woman. So the purpose of this project, I created this purpose as I went through the internet and discovered that we had no data. And I think the purpose of this project is to provide an inclusive historical records of the achievements of historically underrepresented Puerto Rican women in the United States. I thought of Women's Month, that was in March, and I did not see any Puerto Rican women honored in Women's Month. I want to initiate a process of honoring pioneering Puerto Rican women with attention to medicine, socio-medical, and the public health sciences. And I have thought about now, and have spoken with some people about, developing a future institutionalized archives of the pioneering efforts from 1970s to the present of Puerto Rican, Mexican American, and other Latino women. That would be a national archive so that we are recognized at the national level, for example, in the Library of Medicine and the Congressional Library. So we asked, why is recognition of Puerto Rican scientists important? First of all, because it brings honor to our communities. And we have many Puerto Rican communities in the United States, on the Northeast, on the Southeast, and the Midwest, and in Puerto Rico, of course. To acknowledge the leadership and ownership in prior and current scholarly and innovative medical and public health initiatives, which many of our women, I heard Mr. Calderon mention Virginia Bishop. I remember her. To give recognition to scholar activists and community activists who are more likely to work in and on their communities of origin. To serve as role models to our youth in the community, especially for girls and also for boys. To generate knowledge, to challenge stereotypes on the material conditions, gender roles, and accomplishments of Puerto Rican women, family, and communities. Only we can change the image around. So what were the methods and challenges? Like I said, the internet searches for profiles of Puerto Rican women were not there. I had to use personal networks to identify highly accomplished Puerto Ricans and other Latinas. There was a search for known biographies of these women, which was often less visible on the databases despite their contributions. And I also did a brief review of major national awards, such as the MacArthur and the National Academy Awards, to answer questions, what constitutes achievement? I won't go too much into this, but I also went through definitions of what is a pioneer, what is an innovator, what is a scientific discoverer, what is a leader, what is a scientist. I wanted to know if we fit these categories or not. And I know so many Puerto Ricans and Mexican Americans and other Latino men and women who can fit this definition, who create a vision and mission based on science and research, who implemented novel techniques at the macroeconomic level, which is for communities, a novel tool, a person whose efforts to prepare or open up the way. How many Puerto Ricans do you know who have opened up the way? Mr. Calderon sounds like a pioneer in what he is doing in his work. So out of this, silence speaks volumes. If we are not there, why are we not there? And I think the high profile Puerto Rican and Latina medical and public health scientists, we said were not visible on the internet. The question, nor are they visible in prestigious awards. So the question becomes, how do we counter this erasure of Puerto Rican and Latino women in the sciences and the professions? I want to say that in 1982, many of my colleagues participated in this. I did this book, Latina Women in Transition. Out of the 10 articles, about 8 focused on unique issues of Puerto Rican women. So there was a list of 10. That book has been forgotten. And all those issues that we still confront due to poverty and structural racism and inequity still continue to haunt the Puerto Rican community. So they have not been recognized, but we need to go back to that. I want to talk briefly about in the professions. Although we constitute Latinos, male and female, 16% of the workforce, For professors, I wish I had a slide, the last orange box on the bottom. For professors, which would be people who contribute to scholarship, only 3% of full professors are Hispanic. 1% are female, are Latinas. We are talking about over 4,000 colleges and 363 research extensive universities. We constitute 1%. We'll look at medicine in a moment, but in medicine, 5.8% of all physicians are Hispanic, 3.2% are medical school faculty, and of that 3.2%, 4.4% are female. When we look at law, less than 2% of Latinas are lawyers. If we're looking at issues of social justice and challenging and writing about structural racism in the criminal justice system and the legal system, we have very few Latinas. Medicine is also interesting. When we look at the American Association of Medical College data, we have to be careful because they include Puerto Rico. So that's a little bit of cheating. But when we look at Hispanic or Latino or Spanish origin, about 3.6% are Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin of full-time US medical faculty. So it's a very small percentage, and that includes everyone. And when we look at applicants to US medical schools, the light blue here is Mexican. Other Hispanic, which include Puerto Rican, is the red. So that's 20.8%. But you must note that that includes the University of Puerto Rico and other Puerto Rican medical schools. I'm looking for the data only for US medical schools, which we believe will be much smaller. Okay. So there's a recent study that was very interesting in 2020 by Hofstra et al., where he did a study of historically underrepresented minorities, which included Mexican Americans and Puerto Ricans. And he found it was of everyone who has graduated from 1977 with any doctoral degree to 2019. And it was 2 or 3 million people. And he found that there was a stratified system where underrepresented groups, which is us, have to innovate at higher levels than majority groups to have similar career advancement. Their results suggest that underrepresented group scientific careers end prematurely, despite their crucial role in generating novel discoveries and innovation. So again, what we're seeing is that we are under-recognized and unacclaimed in discovery and science, not because we do not engage in discovery and science, but because we are not recognized in those fields. When we looked at the awards, I think it's important to understand that the awards are very ambiguous. So to focus primarily on exceptional creativity, track record of significant achievement, and promise for important future advances. These are words that could be interpreted in many different ways. So that one of the barriers we face is the ambiguity of the way awards are designated in this country. I then looked at a few biographies of women, Puerto Rican women, who really in many ways follow the legacy of Dr. Trías as an advocate of poor women, as community engaged scholars, as activist scholars. And I thought it would be important to go through some of these. We already heard about Dr. Trías and the award that she did get, and the saying, I began to understand that we were coming to different conclusions because we were living different realities. So when someone studies the Puerto Rican community, they don't know our lived experience. They don't know our realities, but we are the ones who are coming to conclusions that are more representative of our communities. Dr. Aida Giacello, which we mentioned, has been an activist, a scholar throughout her life for health equity. She has been a community engaged. She has built organizations. She has done so well in being that innovator and being that pioneer. And I loved her quote, "To be able to treat a population, you need to have an understanding of their culture, beliefs, and behavior." Dr. Marilyn Aguirre Molina, they have both joined us, and I am so happy. I didn't know they were going to be here. She has also had a distinguished career of activism, of scholarship, of trying to make a difference in the lives of the communities that she has served throughout New York. She has done work on Latino men and health, which was a new area when she started. And she has and was a philanthropist for a long time. And she is another one who has been a pioneer and an innovator and an advocate and an activist, which in my view is a woman of achievement. Well, there she is. Dr. Edith Lopez is a Puerto Rican anthropologist who did a follow-up study of sterilization, interviewed women in New York. She has done work on the Puerto Rican diaspora in Hawaii, where Puerto Ricans were shipped by the US government to Hawaii to cut grass, and spent a year there doing that work, and has written a book where she interviewed women who were involuntarily sterilized. So she also follows in the footsteps of Dr. Rodriguez. Dr. Diana Bonta has had a distinguished career as a public health leader and professional. I was very fortunate to have been part of her doctoral committee. And postdoctoral committee, she would tell stories of her work in Long Beach and going into the communities and catching dogs and catching this with the neighborhood people, but really being an advocate of change and social justice and improving the lives of those communities. Now, although Justice Sonia Sotomayor is not in public health or medicine, I couldn't help but also bring her out because she has had also a way to try to change the lives of people as she was going through her own trajectory as a mentor and as a person whose life experience reflects all the barriers that we have experienced. I'm going to go quickly through this. I looked for books. Most of the books on Puerto Ricans and others are books that we, Rita Moreno is in every single book, as is, I forget who the other person is, Jennifer Lopez, so that they see us mainly as entertainers and very sexy women. There are 5 books that I discovered. They're mainly on Chicanos. The Latinas Women of Achievement includes 70 Latina women of Latin American and Spaniard descent and range in every single field. Underrepresented Latinas in STEM. Now, I love this quote by Leonard Bernstein when he was speaking of Latino women in science. And he talks about the contributions of women who share a passion for bettering the world through science and technology. And he speaks to our biographies because we're looking at the accomplishments, but with all these triumphs also comes sadness. A triumph over racial and gender discrimination, the double and triple jeopardy that many of us face as racial, ethnic, and class minorities, mixing career with family, the wars and personal challenges. And he speaks to how each are followed by a hands-on experiment or activity and critical thinking questions. So again, he brings in the larger picture of our own challenges and barriers as racial and ethnic minorities. I won't go through the awards. What I do want to say is that because we were never recognized or hardly ever recognized by mainstream national organizations, we have had a number of organizations, SACNA, Society of Advancement for Chicanos, Hispanics in Science, the American Public Health Association, which Marilyn Aguirre Molina is a co-founder, and myself in 1973, where we started to give awards because that was the only way we could be recognized. But I think our goal has to be recognized at the national level, so that we can represent our communities better. I'm going through this fast because I really think we should have a little discussion. My conclusion are first and foremost is that it is imperative to get social and national recognition, to challenge the long-standing stereotypes of intellectual inferiority. And that intellectual inferiority or presumed incompetence, which has been written about, I think is a major barrier for us getting this recognition. Our invisibility of our accomplishments, I think, speaks to varying forms of structural racism and implicit bias in terms of how accomplishment is interpreted, depending on who's getting the award. The award criteria and nominations process by their intrinsic nature are ambiguous and open to interpretation of majority culture. And also what I have learned is that awards have a significant reliance on a prestigious social network, which oftentimes as Puerto Ricans, we are so, my mother used to say, Josica in the community, that we don't have the time, the energy, and sometimes the will to engage in the largest social networks, which are required for recognition. I think the organizations, again, because of our exclusion from major organizations, it has always been the racial ethnic organizations that have contributed to our recognition. But we need more than that if we're going to have the power to change and to open up those pathways of opportunities for other Puerto Ricans and Latinas. And my concluding thought after looking at this was that we really need to be researching and developing a national gallery in public institutional spaces to showcase and make visible Puerto Rican achievements that will serve as an inspiration to future generations of Puerto Ricans and other Latinos. Thank you. I'm sorry this was so quick, but this will give us a little time for a discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Zambrana, and thank you everyone for your flexibility. Thank you, Juan and Dr. Zambrana, again for sharing these amazing resources that address women's health and for providing us role models of Puerto Rican women and Latinas whose work emulates advocacy, leadership, and courage. We will now open for questions. Dr. Zambrana, to get us started, could you please share, because it is so inspiring and humbling, what you've been able to personally accomplish in your career through research addressing inequities and unpacking the intersectionality of race, ethnicity, gender identity, social, cultural factors, and so on. So what's the one thing you would say that you've learned the most about engaging communities of color in research?
I think the other thing I've learned is that partnership. And I mean, all these women I mentioned here, I have worked with in some way, that we need to, as Puerto Ricans, to work together and develop partnerships and understand that our agenda to train the next generation of Puerto Rican scholars is really important. We cannot let this legacy die now. You know, when I think of Marilyn and Ais and Diana, I mean, we go back to the 1970s and 1980s. And I think without that type of support and understanding, there was a mutual understanding of who we were and what we experienced. That's really important. So we have to continue to promote that. The other thing I've learned is that we keep doing the same research under the same conditions and expect to get something different. And until we really can acknowledge that we're doing the same research with the same people who are disadvantaged, who are poor, who don't have a living wage, that until we need to begin to translate research and say this is and advocate for that change.
Absolutely. And before we go, a quick follow-up question before we go. There's a question in the chat from Dr. Diacello. But you shared various examples of Latina pioneers in research, and you talked about how you recognize a certain level of invisibility or lack of awareness or lack of recognition, perhaps, of these very well-accomplished women. So what do you feel needs to be done to bring more attention and recognition to the contributions of these champions, these guerreras?
Well, what needs to be done is I'm hoping to do it. What needs to be done is to get money and to get a project going that aligns our successes with those of other people in this country. And I think, one of the most, I just read, it was yesterday or today, a physics activist gets this award. Now, activist in the academy, in the research world, is like a bad word. It's like a bad word. It's worthless. Well, suddenly they are stealing our language and everything that we have created is being appropriated by mainstream culture to their advantage. So can't do that. So I think number one, I'm going to try to work closely with the Congressional Library and the National Library of Medicine, because we need to highlight these and these women. And there are others, of course. So I need to get an advisory board. I mean, I called two of my colleagues to ask them who were the achievers. So I think that's really, really important to make it happen. I want to say that I know this is true, that we are not recognized, because when I go into an African-American audience, or if I go into a Latino audience with Puerto Ricans and Mexicans mainly, not South Americans, but Puerto Ricans, they know who I am. They know my work. When I'm in a white audience, they don't know who I am. And that speaks to our invisibility. Yes, we need to get into a national panorama. I think the other two is we need to start helping each other and definitely nominating each other for awards. This is what majority culture people do. This is what they must be. I mean, we have to do this. Now, what happens with this? What happens with this? To do an award, a prestigious award, takes a lot of time and effort. There are too few of us, and that time really takes away from our work. It is I have done awards. They have taken me weeks and weeks and weeks. So unless we make a commitment to help each other to get those awards, and to many of our young people to get those awards, but they're an investment of time. There are too few of us. We have to duplicate ourselves. And the only thing that drives me to do it is that I know that maybe the next generation will be a little bit easier for them because there'll be less of them. So I'm now really committed to developing this project and to use and all my sisters here to help me to be on the advisory board so we can identify that army of pioneers that we have, including community members. I mean, the only community activist we know is, what's her name from the Grapes? Oh my the Mexican, a woman from California.
Huerta, Dolores Huerta.
Yeah, that's the only one we have that we know. Now, there are many Dolores Huertas, both on the West Coast, but also in our own communities on the East Coast. I was going to say, Lisa, this has lit a fire in me. And this is all your fault because you asked me to do this. And it was just shocking and saddening for me not to have people I know who are greats on all over the internet.
And part of the reason why this conversation was critical too is that in my circles, right, with continually emerging Latina researchers and scholars, the question always comes up, particularly across the board with Latinas, but also specifically with Puerto Rican scholars. It's like, oh, we don't have anyone to look up to, like who are our role models? And I'm like, are you kidding? Have you heard of Dr. Ruth Zambrana, Dr. Aida Giacello? And a lot of times I get these blank stares and it frustrates me. So I think it's important. We have a lot of work to do. But before we lose the opportunity and our audience, I wanted to give Kim an opportunity to read some of the comments. And I think there's at least a question or two in there as well. I have tons of questions. I could keep going on, but I want to be fair.
So going up, I see Dr. Giacello asked, how did you get started? How did you decide to go to college to study sociology, be devoted in the social justice movement as they relate to women's issues, Puerto Ricans, Latinas, and advocating as well for African Americans, the poor, and other vulnerable populations?
Well, I can be brief. First, my mother was a tiger, and she was more feminist than feminist. So she believed in women's rights. She helped lots of women, and I observed that. And her words were always, you need to be your own boss, and you need to be able to survive on your own. She helped everyone, regardless of color. She always opened doors. And actually, she didn't speak English, so I had to open the doors. So I think that's part of my upbringing, what really influenced me, her social justice.
So one last question, Ruth. What would you say is, in your experience, mentoring Latinas and supporting their careers, what would you say is that right balance between advocacy and actually advancing professionally?
The first paper I did in California was called Walking in Two Worlds. I remember that. It was in 1984. And that ability to walk in two worlds, I think, is really important. I don't know what my sister girls here, Marilyn and Aida, would say, but you have to learn that dance. You have to learn that dance. So mentoring is really about understanding a different culture, understand the importance of social networks outside of our comfort zone, engaging in work, in tough work and rough work. So, you know, it's a tough transition. So I think acknowledging, in order to advance, in order to achieve, in order to move forward, in order to be mentored, you're going to have to want to be mentored. You're going to have to want to really achieve. And you're going to have to know that you are in a hostile environment where we are perceived as not intellectually fit for this opportunity. And I think all of us, that's my other thing I want to do. I want each of us to write our story. All of us have done great things in spite of the resistance from the larger society. So there's also strength. We need to cultivate tremendous strength in resisting.
I want to thank you again, Dr. Zambrana and Juan. I know that we have limited time, so we have a few closing remarks, but we really appreciate all the amazing resources that you've shared again with us today and highlighting, recognizing, honoring these amazing Puerto Rican and Latina women and their contributions. I believe Ms. Monica Rodriguez had to leave. So we wanted to make sure that everyone has information about the All of Us research program as we try to recruit 1 million in order to improve better health through precision medicine. And precision medicine allows us to have tailored, individualized medicine that will best fit and be suitable to each individual. For more information, you can go to joinallofus.org. And now, if Xiomara Rodriguez is still with us, I'll turn things over to her to share some announcements from the Puerto Rican Cultural Center. Xiomara?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me on. Thank you to all the speakers. This was a beautiful webinar, and to everybody who organized this. So I just have a couple announcements for upcoming events. We have La Bodega del Barrio Food Bank is continuing their education class series on nutrition and health and wellness. So definitely look out and register for these upcoming classes. And then additionally, I wanted to announce that we are continuing the events for El Holgorio de Salsa y Más, which is a summer event series. Actually, at where I've been watching from the meeting from, I'm here at the Mercado del Pueblo. I wonder, can we see this? Oh, hold on. Sorry, you're looking at me right now, aren't you?
Yes.
Here, I'm turning the camera. There we go. Can you see? I'm at the Huepa Mercado del Pueblo. So everybody should come. It's at 2559 West Division Street, and every Saturday we're having events. This Saturday we're showing a documentary that a local filmmaker made on the history of Humboldt Park and the Puerto Rican parade and our community here. So it's going to be Saturday at 3 o'clock. So definitely come by, follow PRCC on Facebook and Instagram. And we hope to see you here every Saturday. Thanks.
Thank you, Xiomara. Fantastic. And those events started April 3rd and they continue on Saturdays, as Xiomara mentioned. We also wanted to share that the Puerto Rican Agenda is hosting a Puerto Rican Health Summit, a 2-day health summit, April 21st and 22nd. That's next week from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Please join us there. A lot of very helpful information as we continue the conversation about mentoring women and mentoring other Latinos through the pipeline into science, STEM careers, etc., as well as having some critical conversations of what's happening now and what's relevant with regards to health outcomes and preventative health. And then on April 28th, we will close this series for now, but we hope to be able to come back and present you additional programming in the near future. But please do join us for our closing session on Wednesday, April 28th with Doctors Marta Cerda and David Marquez, as we have a conversation about recruiting and retaining Latinx older adults in research. It is really important that we engage our older adults in research so that we have the best understanding and the best knowledge as to what's relevant and useful in terms of interventions for our aging population. And wanted to share a few resources. There you see our esteemed scholar, featured speaker for today, Dr. Trustan Branner, receiving and accepting an award with one of her books, The Magic Key, The Educational Journey of Mexican Americans from K through 12 to College and Beyond. Also Toxic Ivory Towers, Latinos in American Society, Understanding Latino Families, and Health Issues in the Latino Community. And these are just a few of the 12 plus books and book chapters, et cetera, that she has, provided us as part of her contribution to science. We also want to remind you again, please do complete the post-event survey. It really helps us to have your feedback and we really value it. And also, if you want to connect back with us and send us any comments directly, you can email us at info@tanomaconsulting.com. You can find more information about the Puerto Rican Cultural Center at prcc-chgo.org, or you can contact me or any of today's speakers using the emails listed on the screen. And finally, before we go, we really ask that you reflect on the legacy of Dr. Helen Rodriguez Trías, Dr. Ruth Zambrana's own legacy, or Dr. Diachelo's legacy, Dr. Marilyn Aguirre's legacy as well, and the role models that were shared today, these courageous women, these guerreras, campeonas, pioneras, that have been at the forefront of influencing science, medicine, public health, education, and so much more. But their voices and presence have often been less visible and sometimes diminished. And far too often, their work goes unknown. The Puerto Rican Cultural Center honors all voices equally and pays homage to our leadership. Equitable representation and inclusion matter. Through Dr. Helen Rodriguez Trías Health Initiatives and the Consuelo Le Corregel Early Childhood Center, among many other efforts, the Puerto Rican Cultural Center features these women front and center. Think about that legacy. Think about these women and think about what legacy you want to leave or what legacy your ancestors have left you that you can build on. We have a lot of work to do, as you can see, but together we can make a difference. So thank you again on behalf of the Puerto Rican Cultural Center of Chicago. Muchísimas gracias, Juan, Dr. Zambrana, for your time today. And thank you to our sponsor, the Network of the National Library of Medicine. We hope everyone considers enrolling in the All of Us Project. And thank you again, everyone who's joined us today. Be kind and loving to one another. Plain and simple, mi gente. Lean on love, compassion, and empathy. Together we can make a difference. Peace and love.